Hello and welcome to TRT World. This is our continuing coverage of the earthquakes that hit Türkiye and Syria. I'm Imran Garda. The death toll continues to rise after two major quakes struck on February the 6th. While rescue efforts in both countries have now mainly turned to recovery, there are still some people being pulled from the rubble. And that's in part due to the technology rescue teams on the ground are using. Alican Pamir reports.
Technology is playing its part in Turkey's ongoing rescue missions. Humanitarian aid agencies such as AFAD are using mobile phone apps, which allow victims to reach rescue teams, find the closest assembly points, and get updates on affected areas. But it's not just mobile software that is helping earthquake victims. Imaging technology is also being used on Ground Zero. Turkey's Asuva defense industry is among the producers of devices that bring hardware and intricate science together.
A combination of tools come into play for our device to work: Doppler radar, heat meter, thermal sensors, and electromagnetism. We developed it together with the Turkish Gendarme General Command. It's used for search and rescue, as well as military purposes. Most of the survivors of this earthquake were rescued with this technology.
The device creates a digital image of the heat produced by the human body, which stands out from the cooler temperature of the surroundings, making it easier to locate those who are trapped.
The heat meter and the Doppler radar on the device calculate heat differences, and it instantly creates a visual of that calculation on the screen. Then, with the help of a computer, we take that data and locate the heat source.
More than 100 of these devices are being used in areas struck by the earthquake, and they have the capability to adjust to different environments.
The survey capacity of our devices vary for different situations. For example, if this search is being conducted for under-soil recovery, then we can scan up to 50 meters below ground. And for recovery missions carried out beneath rubbles, we can view 100 meters below to locate victims.
Asuva chairman Remzi Başbuğ says this imaging technology is one of their strongest assets when it comes to saving lives.
This was a devastating earthquake. There are dust clouds all over the rubble. The search and rescue missions had reached a certain level through other detecting devices and trained dogs. And with heat meters, our devices have been vital in finding, I'd say, 90% of the survivors.
And this may indicate that, like in this disaster, future rescue missions will see innovative technologies and human power working hand in hand. Alican Pamir, TRT World.
Well, joining us now from London is David O'Neill, MBE. He's the team commander of UK rescue team that was in Türkiye. And with him, we have Angelos Amditis, who joins us from Athens. He's the Research and Development Director at the Institute of Communication and Computer Systems. He's also the chairman at It's Europe. David and Angelos, thanks so much for joining us. David, I understand you've just returned from Türkiye. Tell me what it was like.
Yes, thank you. I've literally just walked in to my house. We were there since last Tuesday as the United Kingdom International Search and Rescue Team, and we were based in the Hatay province, working in the centre of the city of Hatay. And there were 77 people in my team, and we were working tirelessly throughout the night to rescue those people that were trapped out there.
And David, we're talking about the technology that's being used. Of course, the technology gives human beings such as yourself information. It gives you information about the surroundings, about the structures, the buildings, and the possibility of people still being alive under the rubble. Give us a sense of how the technology was used in your rescue efforts and how it saved lives.
Yeah, the technology really did help. We were working with AFAD down on the ground, and we did have access to this technology. Whilst we bring our own search dogs and our own technology, this is really groundbreaking technology to do that deep penetration search of heat sources, and that led to successful rescues with our team.
Angelos, where are we at this moment in time as humanity in 2023 when it comes to reacting and responding to natural disasters? Are we equipped to save as many lives as possible in a technological sense on the ground under the rubble?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me with you and allow me to transfer my deepest condolences from myself and the scientific community from Greece and Europe. Our support, our solidarity is there for you. So I hope we can also support you. And yes, technology is playing, I would say, a transformational factor in the operations that we do today. We've seen that more and more we have unprecedentedly, unusually large disasters coming from climate change, but also from physical disasters. And one of the things is, except of the size, is also the fact that it goes beyond country borders. So this means that you need European, international cooperation in order to address such disasters. My colleagues mentioned before a few of the technologies being used today. I would say that you can add to that miniaturized optical cameras, thermal cameras, radar systems, acoustic and system sensors, a variety of technologies that at the end of the day, what they want to do is to support the first responders, the teams that are there, as we just heard before, to localize better and to understand better where they can really go in order to save lives. We've heard that the first 24 hours and then the 72 hours are critical. So how can you really, in a disaster of this size, focus your efforts, and how can you make sure that your responders are on the right places? And even more, how you can make sure that they can run safe operations.
Right.
Because we have seen in the past many responders losing their lives for aftershocks or other disasters. So yes, technology is a primary factor from now on in such situations.
Yeah, to that point, David, I wonder, tell me a little bit about the assessment that takes place when you approach a building. Are there some buildings that you look at, you assess, and you go, if we go in there, we might all lose our lives because maybe the building is not safe?
Yes, of course. And that was very much the case with the aftershock. There's always that threat to my team and all of the responders. As we know, 2 have lost their lives. So there's always that threat. We have a structural engineer that's part of our team that can advise us on the safest way in and out of a building. But the way the buildings are constructed there's so many survivable voids with the reinforced concrete that the hope, is real. There's so much chance of survival within many of the buildings in the city of Hatay where we were.
David, not everybody would have access to these tools. You said your team was lucky enough to have a lot of tools at their disposal, and with AFAD, there was this coordination. And so Angelos spoke about a bunch of different things beyond just thermal imaging. From an engineering perspective, people using drones, using all sorts of different sensors. Tell me the extent of, or rather the scale of, who has the tools. Out of all the responders, is it just a tiny minority of people who have all these tools? Or is it across the board that the vast majority of responders have access to these tools that can save lives?
Well, let's remember that many of the initial responders are just using their ears. They're asking for an all quiet on the scene, and then they're calling out and they're listening for voice. That's where it starts before we get into the technology. And then we've got things like Google Mapping now, where people can give us information and drop coordinates to us and direct us immediately to where they've heard voice. So this is kind of where it starts, from the local teams hearing someone or communication through mobile phones through to being able to get that information out to different responders who can bring in additional technology to help them with the rescue.
Is there anything that you wish you had in addition to what you had on the ground that might have helped?
This technology that you've shown earlier is now on our shopping list. We're working with different teams using this technology, and whilst we use search dogs that are excellent in finding, detecting human scent, the deep penetration that this technology provides, that perhaps dogs can't pick up on that scent because of the depth of the victim. This is something very much now that we will be adding to our toolkit.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. Angelos, I wonder, and you spoke about the need for coordination. Is there the possibility then of some sort of international standardization where first response teams have almost the equivalent of a first aid kit, where they've got all of the tools, it's scalable, it's affordable, and they go in fully equipped to save as many lives as possible?
Yeah, indeed. There are a lot of standardization activities happening right now all over the world. Europe plays a major role on that in order to create common protocols and communication platforms. And this is one of the aspects I would like to stay with. I mean, imagine in a situation like that, communication networks collapses, and then you need to find ways to have a minimum of communication, at least between the rescuers, between the responders. And imagine that no country really, no matter how many resources has, can really address such disasters alone. So this means that you have groups coming from all over the world to support. And this means that these groups need to be coordinated, need to work together. You have even simple things like language barriers that you need to overcome, or ways to transfer data from one to the other. So digitalization, platforms, communication, connectivity are playing a key role. And in order to achieve that, you need a common format, you need common standards, you need common ways of exchanging data, of understanding and of coordinating. So this is a very critical aspect beyond of the sensors, beyond of the systems that we are having today, drones or anything else. This is maybe, I would say, I don't know if David agrees, this would be one of the major aspects in order to really increase effectiveness and to really coordinate all the rescue capabilities.
David, do you agree?
Yes, I do. We have we have such a platform for the international response team, and that's the virtual on-site operations coordination center. However, the connection between the international community and the local community is vital. We're bringing in a wide generic coordination system to any disaster area, but really the intelligence comes from the ground. And that's what we need to tap into as soon as possible when we arrive in country.
Before I let you both go, David, I wonder if you'll allow me to ask you a personal question. If you could sum up the experience of responding to this cataclysmic disaster, what would you say? How did it feel?
I think the whole experience was overwhelming. Just the scale of the disaster, the human suffering, having to walk past known deceased victims in order to try and save lives will have an impact on the whole team. And we're very aware of that. And I just think the scale of this probably hasn't hit us yet. We've just arrived back in the UK, and I think in time to come, this will really hit home, the scale of this disaster and the suffering.
Well, I wish you and your team all the very best. And I thank you both, gentlemen, for joining us here on this special earthquake coverage here on TRT World. Well, the first earthquake took place on February 6th in the early hours of the morning. Most people were asleep in their apartments at the time, with no warning that their lives were about to be changed forever. For many people, though, it was not the first quake they had experienced, as Turkey is no stranger to movements underfoot. Let's take a closer look at what caused this disaster.
Turkey is located in a region with high seismic activity and major fault lines running through the country. This is the North Anatolian Fault, which stretches for more than 1,200 kilometers from the Aegean Sea in the west to the Black Sea in the east. It passes within 20 kilometers of Istanbul, the most populous city in Turkey. And then there is the East Anatolian Fault, which runs through eastern Turkey. This fault is where the major quakes on February 6th took place. Over 4,000 aftershocks have occurred since then. This month's earthquake is the worst in over a century, But it's not the only one. In the past 100 years, more than 20 earthquakes of magnitude 6 or above have hit the country, leaving a trail of destruction.
Well, joining me now from Potsdam, Germany, is a researcher at the German Center for Geosciences Division of Geomechanics and Rheology, Patricia Martinez-Garzon. And from Istanbul is Ziyadin Cakır, Professor of Geology at Istanbul Technical University. Good to have you both on the program. Patricia, let me start with you. No matter how sophisticated we think our global civilization is, we are still too small, too weak, too insignificant to change tectonic plates and those forces underfoot, the rupturing and slipping of fault lines. But do we have the technology to forewarn people early enough that something big is coming?
Hello, thank you so much for having me here in the program today. I think at this time there are some cities at some locations that may allow to have such a technology, for example, early warning systems, which may give some reaction time in the order of seconds up to 1 minute. But this type of systems are not necessarily in place for many locations in the earth. And here, for example, we are seeing one where this was not possible for a number of reasons. One of them was that the earthquake was very shallow.
And I wonder also, when we have early warning, Patricia, do we have warning about the scale of it and the magnitude of it, or do we just know that something is happening?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think at the moment, most of the available early warning systems that are in place in just a few cities of the world, like for example in Mexico City or in San Francisco, California, they kind of detect the beginning of the earthquake, and they provide an alert before the most destructive waves arrive. And in that sense, the amplitude of these primary waves at the beginning of the earthquake already give an idea of the sense of the magnitude that is coming.
Ziyadin Cakır, in the Turkish context, whether we're talking about the southeast or whether we're talking about cities such as Istanbul, what's the best that we can do? Is it, as Patricia says, a few seconds, maybe even a minute of warning when an earthquake is underway?
Well, for Istanbul, apparently we have such a system running, but that provides a few seconds because of the distance of the fault to the city center. The coast is quite close. It's not like New Mexico. You have 100 kilometers away where the faults are. That gives you plenty of time to warn people, but the system in Istanbul works for alerting and cutting the electricity, power lines and metro lines and gas and etc., but not for people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And for the southeastern Turkey or elsewhere in Turkey, the faults basically lie beneath the people, or beneath the cities, and as a result, there is no way of even giving this a few seconds to cut the power lines, etc.
Yeah, Ziyadin, the internet is a very noisy and messy place, and there have been people who do claim, people with millions of followers who do claim that you can actually predict when earthquakes are happening. Beyond the issues of probability, when you can say, yes, of course, there's a fault line and there is a probability that this would slip at some point, beyond that, is it actually possible to predict an earthquake within a reasonable range?
Well, I wish it was possible. Patricia knows better than me. She's a seismologist. I don't think so. I mean, there is no technology for the moment. There's no science behind this, that can predict earthquakes. Unfortunately, it's not possible.
Okay, Patricia, beyond the realms of probability, again, so for example, I'm in Istanbul right now, Ziyadin's in Istanbul right now. People have this collective anxiety, heightened after an earthquake happens elsewhere because they know that this city runs along a fault line. People in San Francisco have that same anxiety, people in many, many places around the world. Beyond the realms of probability, is it possible to know? What's the closest we can get to knowing, Patricia?
At the moment, as Professor Cakır explained, it's rather impossible to provide an accurate prediction of when and where and how big a future earthquake might be. We are, this partially, it's due to the fact that the faults are very complex and they interact to each other. And we also have still limited data. We have only data from tens or even in the best case, hundreds of stations monitoring it. So even we will need even much more data. We are working towards it and we still don't lose completely the hope. And for example, there are some very promising advances of being able to forecast earthquake ruptures in the lab. And there are small cracks that open before a big failure occurs. Mm-hmm. So that in the lab, these type of things are starting to be possible. But extrapolating that to nature is unfortunately at the moment still far from being possible. Mm-hmm. And the best that we can do is to try to monitor the fault as closely as possible and also in real time to have an accurate idea of what is the activity of each segment in detail and understand which faults may pose a major threat.
Is part of the worry, Patricia, the fact that you might generate false alarms because a crack that is born out of pressure might not necessarily mean an earthquake's coming, but if you put a society on high alert that one might be coming, you create a whole set of other problems.
Exactly. So that's the reason why such information cannot be used at the moment to be transmitted to society. There will be too many false alerts and there will be really no reason for it. So the best that we can do is to try to monitor trends of seismicity in the long term and in the short term, try to learn how does the fault behaves before an earthquake at different time scales, and in time try to find patterns on whether there is some sort of repeatability in its behavior or not.
Ziyadin Cakır, is it difficult to model this because each earthquake creates a new set of variables? Is that one of the issues?
The problem is we don't know the stress conditions on the faults. You see, and Patricia is an expert in the slow motions. You see, before the 1999 Izmit earthquake, there was like I think it was 45 minutes before the nucleation of the rupture. There was some accelerated aseismic motion that led finally to the rupture. But this is not, observe, it's not a rule. And she's also working on this in Turkey, that's fair. And so there is hope, maybe some faults behave like this and there is a preparation phase that can tell us that it's there. Using precise seismological techniques. So there is a work in progress in this field. And the other thing, Patricia may correct me, you see, the earthquakes nucleate at a point, right? In this case, it was a town called Pazarcık, you see, and it was off the Istanbul fault. It was on the secondary fault, even, you see, and then it ruptured north and then arrived at the Istanbul fault and triggered a segment that was quiet for 500 years. We knew this, and then it didn't stop there. I mean, it propagated bilaterally in south and north or east direction, okay, and then rupturing additional segments. And then That's why the size of the earthquakes, reached to this point, 7.8. I mean, you never know how many sections, we call segments, are going to rupture when an earthquake starts. You see, the more or number of segments are broken, the larger the size of the earthquake. So from the beginning, it is not really, it's not really possible to estimate where the rupture will stop, and that means what the size of the earthquake will be.
I would love to get Patricia to add to this, but we're completely out of time. Patricia, we'll have you back on the channel sometime soon. Of course, there will be a lot to learn from these twin earthquakes in Kahramanmaraş and beyond, and look at the geological and seismic changes that have occurred as a result of it over time. We'll have you both back on the channel sometime soon. But for now, let me thank you so much for lending your expertise to the program.
Thank you.
Well, that's the latest from us for now, but let's leave you with these aerial pictures from Kahramanmaraş, the epicenter of the first earthquake. Our coverage continues here on TRT World. Do stay with us.